Welcome, Minister Spruds, to Hudson. Welcome to our in-person audience as well as our online audience. My name is Matt Boyse. I'm a Senior Fellow here at Hudson and covering mostly Central European issues. We're so delighted to have you here. I apologize for the little bit the delay, but you were on the Hill, and I must say that as much as we would like to start at 12, I'm much happier that you're on the Hill working with, sort of talking to congressmen and women than you are here, because that is really, really important at this time. So, but I understand that the minister has a little bit of time at the tail end, so we can actually spend about maybe not quite that full hour, but close to the full hour together. So we just started a little bit later, and we'll end a little bit later. You have just a brief kind of logistical note. We'll start off with you, Mr. Minister, maybe offering 5 or 10 minutes of message, anything that you'd like to say to us, to the American people, to the online audience, et cetera. Messages either from your conversations here so far, your meetings, et cetera, or anything else that, while you're here visiting Washington on today. This is the 25th anniversary of the first real tranche in 1999 of new NATO member states. And of course, you're going to have your 20th anniversary later this month, so another big day in March. But anyway, any messages you might wish to have, and we'll have a bit of a conversation, then we can turn it over to the audience and for any questions and answers, if that's okay.
Okay, excellent.
Good. So anyway, the minister is, I will dispense with a long introduction, otherwise he's a think tanker, a scholar, an academic, a politician, then became a politician, and now is a minister of a very important Baltic country. I must say that the title of your talk here is one of the invitations that went out as the Baltic view on European security. I must say that was a typo. We understand that it's a Baltic view on European security, and so apologies to whatever other sort of Estonian or Lithuanian or perhaps Finnish or Swedish or any other Baltic country that might have noticed that typo there. So in any case, we're so delighted to have you. I must say it's always nice to have such a well-informed view from the eastern flank of NATO, because you offer such interesting perspectives on European security issues. Your countries have been right on so many issues when other countries have been wrong, and I think we should have been listening to you. Many people should have been listening to you a lot earlier, and which is one of the reasons we are where we are. But anyway, that's now ancient history, but it remains valid today as well. Your country is so is so outspoken on so many issues. It is so robust in its support for Ukraine. It is so clear. I must say, I was just in the last few weeks, I ran into a number of comments by your president. Your president is very outspoken and very clear. It's interesting. He pushed back on the Pope. One must not capitulate in the face of evil, but fight and defeat it, so that evil raises the white flag and capitulates. He pushed back on Elon Musk, who wondered whether why NATO exists after the Warsaw Pact was resolved. And he responded, the reason NATO was founded, exists, and will last is Russia and other enemies of the free world. Your president is on record. He responded to Dmitry Peskov a few days ago, who was commenting on the death of Andrei Navalny by quoting Lermontov. Goodbye, unwashed Russia, country of slaves, country of masters, and you blue uniforms, and who their devoted people. So he pushed back on Putin's latest comments on nuclear war, commenting he wants to intimidate us and to continue his aggression against Ukraine and the free world. We must not yield to his blackmail, double down on our efforts and to arm Ukraine, strengthen our own defenses, and not allow him to draw any red lines. And finally, on Dmitry Medvedev, who just a few days ago stood before that map of Europe, redrawn map of Europe. He recalled the language from the Nuremberg trial in 1946. To initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is a supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. Wow, your president is very very clear and very forthright about some of these issues. So I'm sure you will have some interesting comments to make on this. I would also perhaps maybe start off by asking you, perhaps give you your opportunity to say something in this, as we begin this conversation.
Okay, dear Matt, thank you so much. It's a pleasure, and you already said everything what I wanted to say.
Oh, really? I was just quoting your president. I mean, I'm reading this. I'm thinking, wow, he's really very, very, very clear and outspoken. Sorry.
No. So I think we can go immediately almost to Q&A session. But anyway, of course, no. Matt, thank you so much for having me, and Hudson Institute also for having us here. So it's always a pleasure, and it's always a pleasure to come back to Washington, D.C. I spent in my previous life, if I may say so, as a Fulbright Fellow at the Johns Hopkins University, so for half a year. So always Washington is dear to my heart, and of course now as a politician, as a minister, it's always I'm very grateful and very delighted and privileged to be back. On the Baltic countries, and I think here I can speak or using the previous analogies of being a scholar, there was a saying, that Estonia is more like a Nordic country, Lithuania is more like a Central European country, so Latvia is the only Baltic country. So we are representing the Baltic view to some extent. So, but again, so this is more on subjective side. Yes. I guess we can expand a lot. So what we see, what we experience, what is the Latvian position on this, I will try to be very concise so that we can go in Q&A session immediately, so we can have an interactive discussion. I think what we see, it's really the fundamental shift of geopolitics. It's in many ways formative earthquake. We live in a fragile world in many ways. We face a lot of tasks. Task of course, supporting Ukraine, being unified as a transatlantic alliance, containing Russia, of course, also strengthening and doing our own homework in the process. So, of course, there are a lot of tasks in these challenging times. On NATO, again, sort of being concise, I think, as you mentioned, 75 years of NATO as alliance. It has been a successful alliance, one for all for one. I think we should not underestimate what we have achieved together. We should also not underestimate ourselves how we reacted in a situation of crisis, in a situation of challenge. We've been unified by and large. We've been, of course, including very clearly also in strategic concept that we should define Russia as a threat. So in this case, I would say the Zeitenwende, or the change of mindset, it has taken across the NATO alliance. Yes, of course, there is always a diversity, there is always a discussion and domestic dynamics within the alliance, but at the same time, I think we should not also underestimate so far how we reacted to the existential threat what Russia poses. Yes, of course, there are also practical things what we have to accomplish. Namely, in the Vilnius summit, we agreed upon a regional plans. And of course, regional plans, a new defense posture, is important to implement that posture, that approach practically. And of course, we are in the process of implementing it practically. The Washington summit will be an important, again, step forward, I think very symbolic. But yes, 75th anniversary for NATO, but also 20th anniversary for the Baltic membership, and not only back in 2004, and I think it has been one of the best things what have happened to the Baltic countries, but also to the Eastern flank in general. So of course we feel this, the hand in hand and shoulder of our allies, and here of course we highly appreciate also what the United States has done, and being indispensable nation for us in the region. We perceive it, and we continue, and also that's why as we started, we've been on a hill to also of course to promote and to strengthen our strategic partnership, which is very important. And of course, also support for Ukraine is continuously important. It's not just about Ukraine. Ukraine is not fighting for its freedom. It's fighting for the European values, the transatlantic values. It's fighting for credibility of transatlantic alliance. It's fighting for rules-based international order. I mean, the global implications are extremely sort of important what we see in Ukraine. So for 2 years, yes, of course, challenging times, difficult times, we ask those questions. So how long we should also ready ourselves, but we can see that, yes, that it can take some time as well. And of course, here the unwavering support for Ukraine is extremely important. And that's why, of course, we look closely what's happening on the Hill as well, support for Ukraine. And of course, so far, US has been indispensable in this regard. But of course, it's a common and joint effort to provide support for Ukraine. Also, of course, there are different kind of coalitions and Rammstein coalitions. And here again, US leadership has been instrumental. And we have just established a little bit looking from Latvian perspective, the drone coalitions, so the different capability coalitions. So of course, we'll look for different formats, different frameworks, different ways how to support Ukraine. And this is important to reinvent support and of course, keep it and sustain it in a long-term perspective. On Russia, I guess I can repeat myself that everything might change in Russia every 10 years, but nothing changes in 100 years. So it's expansionist in many ways, be it Tsarist Russia, be it Soviet Russia, be it post-Soviet and Putin's Russia, and it's in many ways not just Putin's Russia, it's also Russia's Putin. And what we see that George Kennan is in many ways right, and his long letter could be just as relevant as it was back in 1940s, also now in 2020s. So yes, and of course, let's not underestimate Russia. At the beginning, it seemed to be that, I mean, the war can finish quickly. Russia has its ability also to adjust, but I think let's also not overestimate Russia. So of course, it has its also challenges, and I think the sanctions and also the common and unified approach is extremely important in this regard. At the same time, yes, we should do our homework, and Latvia takes it very seriously. We have defense spending this year. Approximately 3%. It depends how to calculate it. Basically, it's approaching 3%. So we have a specific law of defense financing. So this year it's 2.4%, next year 2.5%, and by 2027, 3%. But since on the top of this, we are adding additional expenses like air defense system acquisition. So it means that already this year it's pretty much approaching 3%. So, and again, so that we of course advocate and strongly encourage the member states, our allies to fulfill the commitment of spending 2%, because of course this is demonstrating understanding of the world, what we face, understanding that we should invest, and it's not just invest in our defense capability, but also, of course, in defense industry. These things are very much interrelated. And at the same time, of course, it also shows that we are credible and we are fulfilling and following the commitment we have made. Yeah, so that's why, of course, for us, it's taken for granted and understandable that, yes, 2% absolutely is a must. And we see the positive trend within NATO that this year, almost 20 countries will be already reaching the 2% threshold. And again, yes, of course, it's not just about 2%. It's a capability development in our country. It's about also reintroducing conscription. And here we follow the Lithuanian and Estonian example as well. Yes, we reintroduced conscription after 2022, but we realize that also it's just about quality, but also quantity makes quality as well, that we have to be ready and that the culture of preparedness and readiness is important. So yes, reintroducing conscription has been one of the important steps. We very much understand that also fulfilling the commitment of responsible host nation status is important. So they hosting the battle group, which is being now upgraded to upscale to the level of brigade with Canadian leadership, but also with US presence, and we again highly evaluate. So the US is certainly indispensable nation for us. Strategic partnership is very highly appreciated, and commitment of US also to security and defense of the Baltic countries is absolutely very highly appreciated in Latvia. So the American flag in Latvia and in the Baltic countries is a flag of indispensable nation, as also the provider of security. And of course, here we see that these relationships are extremely important and strategic. Mm-hmm. I'll finish here because, again, we can expand and I can sort of provide, of course, a lengthy discussion, but already I will be happy to hear also the questions and comments from your side.
And don't forget, thank you for that. Don't forget you're towards the very top of the EU member states or NATO member states in terms of percentage for GDP that you're devoting to Ukraine too. It's not just the 2%, et cetera, or 3 or whatever. It's also percentage of GDP. You're up there towards the top as well. So that's quite a commitment. Yes, last week Sweden acceded to NATO finally, and so I mean you being you mentioned that Latvia is the only Baltic country. If Estonia is Nordic and Lithuania is Central European. So
that's what needs some scholar in the past.
Yes. If I could just push on that one a little bit.
Yeah, please.
All right. How does it? Okay, so with Sweden and Finland both now. Members of NATO. How? I mean, some people have used the term the Baltic Sea has become a NATO lake. Now, whether that is the right or a good phrase or not is a different question. But the point is, it's that phrase is out there. How does the Baltic Sea per se look from Riga right now in terms of now you have the Russian fleet, such as it is in St. Petersburg. It no longer. How is it operating in the Black Sea? How should we understand? You've got the Kaliningrad Oblast, and you've got but the water itself is now surrounded pretty much almost exclusively by NATO member states. What is happening in the Black Sea proper from a defense standpoint?
Baltic Sea.
Yeah. Did I say Black Sea? Sorry,
yeah.
I'm working on a Black Sea paper. The Baltic Sea. I meant the Baltic Sea.
Okay.
I've got Black Sea on my mind.
No. No. First of all, I think we're very happy, and I think we're absolutely welcoming the Sweden and Finland joining NATO. I think it's extremely important for the region, and of course, I would say once more underlines that NATO is appealing, NATO is attractive, so that countries are willing to join. Sweden, which has been for 200 years a neutral country, decided that yes, now it's time actually to join the alliance. And I think it shows something, it says something, because after 2014, there was a discussion, so what about also the Finnish and Swedish membership to NATO? But then it was not on the table. Now after 2022, so there is understanding that actually being part of NATO, it is a provider of security. And it also once more sort of underlines importance of NATO and actually being perceived also as an important collective defense alliance for the countries which have been for a long time cultivating and practicing the neutrality. So this is sort of the more general observation also actually which attests to the strength of collective defense organization, such as NATO in this case, of course. On Sweden and Finland joining, absolutely, I think that we are first of all also grateful. I can immediately say that Sweden has already announced that it will be sending troops to Latvia, that there will be battalion-size battle group or presence of Sweden in Latvia. But at the same time, it's not just about the battle group or the battalion in Latvia. It's also about, of course, making the whole region, the Baltic Sea, safer. So I would say now Baltic Sea is safer for all countries involved. We speak about, of course, increased interoperability. We speak about convergence of interests and approaches. We speak, of course, about the supplies and enablers, which are extremely important when sort of the region is being viewed as coherent and comprehensive region. So that, absolutely, so I think it makes Baltic Sea much safer and stronger of all NATO countries which are now present there. I would be careful about the Baltic Sea as a NATO lake. Exactly because what you mentioned. Yes, now we say, sometimes we mention the word that it's a NATO lake. I would be careful because, of course, Kaliningrad Oblast and also the St. Petersburg or Leningrad Oblast is still there. Of course, we see the ships and also the planes flying or being present in the Baltic Sea permanently. So that's why, of course, it also keeps us, in a sense, mobilized that, Russia is still present there, aggressor country is still present there in the Baltic Sea. But of course, also with strengthening the alliance within the Baltic Sea, also, of course, it once more is a a reminder of the strengths and a reminder of the common policies, reminder also, of course, that we can do many things even more efficiently together. And it's also, of course, you can look from both perspectives. Kaliningrad region, on the one hand, is present in a Baltic Sea region, in the region which is now pretty much the NATO region, but at the same time, of course, it also makes the Kaliningrad region, well, also vulnerable in many ways. So we can look from both perspectives. We are discussing Suwalki Gap, that well, the Baltic countries are somehow, they're connected to the mainland of NATO just through Suwalki Gap, but you can look also from opposite side. I mean, that also Kaliningrad region is, well, a separate region, and Russia, I think, should be also very careful what it does in the Baltic Sea region.
So their activities on the water or in the region have not changed that much in your perspective, despite these more recent developments, aside from, for example, withdrawing a lot of assets and sending them towards Ukraine, for example.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on both. Of course, I mean, there is a decreased presence because absolutely the Russian troops have been, in a sense, of course, in Ukraine, in its full-scale aggression in Ukraine. But at the same time, of course, I mean, there is still military assets in the Baltics, in the Baltic Sea, including in Kaliningrad Oblast.
Just not too long ago, the Lithuanians published a kind of an intelligence assessment. At least there's the one that was released that's unclassified that we were able to read about. Talked about their assessment of where Russia is right now. They had things like, Russia was able to continue for another 2 more years in Ukraine. It had, its defense industrial base is on war footing. That they're not, abandoning its goals, et cetera, a long-term focus on the Baltic Sea, et cetera. And then the Estonians also not that long ago had published a similar assessment that Russia is busy with Ukraine, but it has 3 to 4 years to prepare for a war or some sort of a test with NATO. It was does Latvia? You may still be working on your assessment, but do you have anything that you can say publicly that might comment on those assessments as well from your perspective?
Well, I think that there are assessments which are based on a specific factological detail, and as I mentioned previously, let's of course not underestimate Russia's ability to adjust as well, and we've seen that there is element of adjustment has taken place. But let's also, of course, not overestimate, and I think Russia has its challenges as well, and I mean the sanctions and the strict policies by the West certainly have an impact on Russia. And I mean, again, look, some military turmoil which we have seen in Russia as well just shows that domestically not everything is perfect under the surface as well. Let's be realistic on this one. On years, yes, of course, we can calculate different years and different scenarios, but what I always say, and I will repeat it, we should be ready for any kind of scenarios, not after 3, 5, or 8 years. We should be ready for those scenarios today. Even we have to be ready yesterday, but still it's today. It's basically all the time we should prepare ourselves for different kind of scenarios. It's not that we calculate when Russia exactly might regain something. We very much hope and we will do everything that actually it will never regain its strength, because I mean that it loses the war. It should be strategically defeated in Ukraine for different reasons, and of course what we already discussed previously, that that strategic defeat actually must be imposed already or inflicted in Ukraine. But at the same time, of course, if we take different kind of adjustments, we might calculate different scenarios, but we should be ready for them today. And again, let's face it, we are facing some hybrid warfare right now. It's not just that it's somewhere in the future or it will be happening tomorrow. It's what we see, what we experience in terms of the disinformation, in terms of the hybrid attacks, in cyber attacks against critical infrastructure incidents in the Baltic Sea. The disinformation, of course, I mean, these things, weaponization of illegal migration. So that's what we see on everyday basis in many ways. Mm-hmm. So we should be ready right now to different kind of attacks, hybrid attacks, hybrid activities today, and also, of course, in terms of military, there is no like the specific timeline which we should sort of set, like, look, this only then some threat will appear. It has, we have to face it immediately.
No, you're facing it every day in one way or another. You have a very large Russian, in fact, the largest Russian-speaking population of the Baltic states, correct? And they're presumably a target of Russian disinformation and attempts perhaps to even to weaponize them in your own country. Are you seeing that as well, in addition to the other cyber attacks and all the the weaponization of migrants and that sort of thing? Are you seeing anything with regard to your own Russian-speaking population?
Well, Russia is using different kind of means, different kind of tools to manipulate, to influence, of course, also, as I said, using disinformation and propaganda. So this is certainly part of the Russian toolbox. At the same time, I would also not overestimate or not over-exaggerate also how efficient it is. You said Russian-speaking minority. I would rephrase it Russian-speaking minorities. So in plural, because there is a spectrum of different ethnic Russians or Russians by background in Latvia. And if you see also the public opinion polls, absolutely the dominant majority of Russian-speaking population or ethnic Russians with ethnic Russian background, they are loyal and patriotic. So there is no, again, a scope for the influencing and sort of manipulating. Yes, of course, I mean, these attempts, they remain there. So, of course, there is a willingness somehow to manipulate, but sort of I would also say that there are some limited scope of also manipulation, what can be achieved, because also the Russian-speaking minority, of course, is much more appreciative to live in democratic free societies than to live in under authoritarian, aggressive, imperialistic dictatorship.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the Suwałki Gap. As we listen to the Russian information space and some of the things, some of the voices coming out of there, we sort of and some of it's actually quite aggressive. I mean, do you as it's probing in all sorts of different countries, do you see that at all as a potential flashpoint going forward, or of course Russia's busy right now. But how does it look from a Latvian perspective? The Suwałki Gap being that corridor, some people call it the Suwałki corridor between Belarus and Kaliningrad Oblast, connecting Poland and Lithuania. That's not that far away from Latvia too. I would imagine you would also think about it too every so often as a potential, I don't know, area for Russia to probe at a time when nobody's paying attention.
Well, yes, Eastern flank, of course, has its challenges, and we are in the front line with the aggressor country, and this should be certainly taken into account. At the same time, of course, I mean, there are different scenarios, and also there is a specific planning for those different scenarios. So I would not overestimate or over-exaggerate importance of one particular flashpoint, as you mentioned. Yes, of course, we realize what should and could be done, and of course, we also address those issues. But I think I should also remind ourselves that there is the Baltic countries and front line is like something outside of NATO. So attack against one NATO country means attack against all NATO countries. So we are not that someone is less secure and someone is more secure. So we are all NATO. And I would be very careful just to somehow to distinguish and take out the Baltic countries saying, look, I mean, we are in the front line, another like 27 or 28 countries are somewhere far away. Once more, I mean, we are all NATO. It's external EU and NATO border. So it means also that, of course, it's the general NATO flashpoint in a sense, and of course NATO certainly takes into account let's say different kind of scenarios and different kind of planning, which should be of course also specifically correlated with those challenges.
Mm-hmm. On Friday, between Friday and Sunday, the Russians will be voting.
Voting?
Yes, in elections, in elections. In quotation marks. You can sort of look at, and of course we know what the outcome is going to be. The question is just what the number is going to be. Is it going to be higher than it was last time, or or what? Pick a number. I don't. We take a bet, see what the number is. But
previously there was a saying like 70%
right.
participation, 70% support.
Right.
So this time I guess there might be some adjustment. 65% of participation, 80% of support. So I'm just now speculating. So
yeah, well, that is an interesting question. So what will it be? Will it be a bit more than it was last time, 77, or will it be a little bit, whatever? The point is, do you expect any different behavior from Putin after he's now democratically, in quotation marks, confirmed? Because he no longer has to worry about an election, et cetera. An election, in quotation marks, of course, too.
Short response is no, I don't
nothing. In other words,
expect.
no mobilization now, perhaps that which has been kind of hasn't really happened, in certain parts of the population, but rather only in others. But maybe now that this is behind him, once that's behind him, maybe you will feel emboldened to draft other parts of the population that they might not wish to have done so before the election, that sort of thing, or anything else.
Well, I think the hidden mobilization has taken place already for 2 years. So we've seen the mobilization number using different tools and different instruments. So I would not see that there would be some kind of radical change. I mean, the basic thrust, basic direction is very clear. So, of course, Putin has put a high stake on fighting this war. Unfortunately, of course, the absolute neglect for human life is how Russia approaches it, how Putin approaches it. And sort of this is exactly what we have to face, tragically, unfortunately, brutally. And, of course, the human loss, what we experience in Ukraine, I don't think so there are any changes. So neglect for a human life. Outside of Russia, of course, neglect for a human life and human dignity also within Russia. Mm-hmm. So, of course, the question is how far, how sustainable it is within Russia, because we've seen some of those international interventions, and of course, the last one also in Afghanistan, like back in the 1980s. So it undermined the whole empire as well. So that's why, of course, those foreign adventures and foreign imperialistic ambitions in practice sometimes might face also challenges for domestic reasons, for domestic also the stability. But yes, so what we see, as I mentioned previously, it's Putin's Russia. Yes, in many ways it's a Putin decision making. Putin started the war, and of course it's a very narrow circle, it seems, which makes decisions. But at the same time, it's also Russia's Putin. So Putin reflects in many ways his DNA, which is a part of Russian identity. The imperialistic ambition is very strong and powerful. And I remember that back, it was in, and we sometimes discuss while mobilization doesn't touch upon Moscow and St. Petersburg, then everything is sort of okay. But I remember in 2012, when Putin was re-elected, which time? I don't know already. Well, which is a number of, I think, the third time. In Moscow and St. Petersburg, he didn't receive 50% of support. But then in 2014, after annexation of Crimea and basically invasion of Ukraine, then in 2014, the highest support, the public opinion support, was exactly in Moscow and St. Petersburg. So that's why on the one hand, you might be sort of supporting some democratic, you can say, the voting rights, etc. But I think imperialistic identity is also part of the history and legacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it would. Yeah, maybe those are the sorts of demographics that should also go. Should be sent to die for Russia then, because they've been relatively left relatively unscathed, with most of the burden being borne by ethnic minorities across the country. But that's a different question. Maybe just one last question. Well, what about? I've got two potential questions, but we can turn it over to conversation. But I wanted to ask you. The 75th anniversary of NATO will be coming up in a few months, and the summit will be here in Washington. Any thoughts from a Latvian perspective about what might happen there, including whether the next Secretary General might be your foreign minister, who I gather has thrown his hat in the ring, along with, of course, a number of others. It would be great if there were to be a Secretary General from the eastern flank of NATO. You understand Russia better than most. I think it's high time for a Secretary General to come from one of the new member states, whether it be a Romanian or whether it be an Estonian or whether it be a Latvian, whatever. That's. But any thoughts on number one, the summit in Washington in a few months, as well as whether whether a Latvian might become the next Secretary General?
Of course, we'll be happy to see Latvian as the next Secretary General, but of course, as you said, so the important part is that the next Secretary General is transatlanticist, that he sees the unity of the transatlantic alliance as absolutely the top priority, that he is able, of course, to be efficient and also keeping the whole alliance unified in those challenging times. I think that Jens Stoltenberg, as Secretary General, was very successful, and of course we can also appreciate also how he took the leadership role in this regard. Absolutely. So yes, of course, we'd be happy to see the Secretary General from Eastern Flank with 2%, perhaps also the female Secretary General. So there are, of course, options. But once more, I think, but of course, at the same time, as I said, so the transatlantic unified approach is 2%. Also, encouragement that all countries should fulfill the commitment of 2%. I think these are the important elements, important priorities. What we also would see and expect from the next Secretary General. As for the NATO summit, yes, it's a very symbolic one. I mean, 25th anniversary of the first enlargement of NATO, and of course 20th anniversary of Baltic countries, and also a number of countries joining as well back in 2004, and of course then 75th anniversary. So I think it's a symbolic one. So the symbolism of the summit is important there. So and I think once more the unity and efficiency and readiness to respond to those crises, I think that's what should and could be underlined. There are also practical steps like, again, implementability or executability of regional plans, but that we move forward also with specific elements in this regard. Yes, of course, there are some discussions that we should strengthen our air defenses, and we can also have the common joint sort of development also in this regard. Yes, practical steps also with regard to Ukrainian membership or being closer to NATO alliance as well. Of course, it was on the plate back in Vilnius, but of course it also will be discussed in the Washington summit, that NATO Ukraine Council as well, but also again those practical steps how we can help Ukrainians to all the time to sustain reform and make it even more efficient in terms of the military and not only. But that's why, yes, I think there are a number of symbolic and practical steps and endeavors and tasks of what then could be achieved in Washington summit in coming months. And of course,
yes, a big event.
Yep.
Maybe we should just stop for now, and then you have a few more minutes. You said you're very generous with your time. Appreciate your staying a little bit longer. So why don't we just, you, sir.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Landay I'm with Reuters. Going back to the question about how is Russia responding to the addition of Sweden and Finland. Russia has nuclear weapons in Kaliningrad, and back in 2022, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who is still very close to Putin, warned that if they did join, that Russia would have to take steps to restore the nuclear balance in the Balkans. In the Baltics. So I'm wondering, is that a concern of yours? Have you seen any hints or suggestions from Russia that they will, in fact, increase the deployment of nuclear weapons on the eastern flank?
Well, of course, a concern for all NATO countries is a imperialistic, aggressive Russia. But at the same time, the focus is absolutely what we could do. And of course, we should not sort of look what a blackmail of Russia is. Unfortunately, some of the promises or some of the commitments that Russia has made, I mean, they've been violated. So that's, of course, the most important is how we focus ourselves on our homeworks and how we strengthen the alliance. And here, once more, I think I'm absolutely convinced and happy that Sweden and Finland has joined. It once more also underlines that also those countries cannot be somehow blackmailed, that they realize the importance of being part of the most successful alliance, and they made this step. And certainly, of course, the Baltic Sea region is, as we discussed with Matt, is safer right now. And of course, some manifestations by Dmitry Medvedev, I think it's even difficult to comment. So, and I would not go into and not spend much time, I think, on this. But I guess once more, it's what we do and not focus or over-focus on, unfortunately, the partner or neighbor, in this case already the aggressor country, which has absolutely violated the international norms.
Well, it's also interesting how after Finland first put in its application, the Russian reaction, including Putin's reaction, was really very, very ambivalent. It's sort of like a meh, kind of response. Not very much, which demonstrated how bogus the whole NATO argument was in the whole Russian, narrative. Because until then, everyone was saying, well, this was all happening because of NATO membership, et cetera, for the NATO issue for Ukraine. In fact, when then Finland submits its application, and then the reaction from Russia is, won't make much. But of course, that's changed over time. It's gotten much sharper over time. But that initial reaction was very telling. You, ma'am, in the white. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is Lauren Guillaume. I work with Razum for Ukraine, and I wanted to ask, given the current debate and delay of the supplemental in Congress right now, if you may, could you share with us what your message would be to Congress and perhaps any sentiments that you observed today and or your reaction to the delay of the supplemental right now? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Of course, it is a very important question and issue, and the Western countries, Europe, United States, the support has been important and sizable so far. And of course, it is absolutely instrumental also, and this unwavering support for Ukraine is absolutely instrumental for Ukraine to win this war. And that's why, of course, for us, it's no question that we should continue unwaveringly support, that we'll look for different ways. Of course, it also means that we should do our homework as well. It's, of course, we have our own stocks, but at the same time to deepen, expand, and to look also how we can sustain an effort, financial one, military one. And of course, in this case, wishes that it should be adopted as soon as possible. That, of course, the United States has been indispensable and has taken a leadership role. And once more, for instance, Rammstein format it's led by United States. And in this regard, of course, we can just encourage that basically Ukraine is fighting, of course, for its freedom, but also it's fighting for the values of the democratic community. It's fighting for international rules-based order. So, of course, in this case, it's very important to support Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. You, sir, in the back. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Alejandro Sanchez, I'm an analyst for different places in DC. I understand that Latvia reintroduced conscription last year.
Yes.
It's mandatory, for men and voluntary for women.
Yes.
And I think around 11 or 12 women applied. As Ukraine has shown that in Ukraine you have women who are combat medics, snipers, drone operators. So as Latvia prepares for the worst case scenario, what is the role of female military personnel? Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, about reintroducing conscription. Yes, we believe that reintroducing conscription is very important, that it is exactly about engaging, involving the whole society, developing the culture and the skill and the will of preparedness as well for different kind of scenarios. Yes, at the moment also we have a incremental, gradual way how we conscript young people, young males. In this case, last year it's for 300, this year it's 600, next year it's 1,000, and we will be having 4,000 in 2028, so on an annual basis. So far it has been actually very much voluntarily, but we start also do with already selection through mandatory mechanisms, and absolutely sort of it's about, of course, providing skills and knowledge to the young soldiers being within army, but also creating a strategic soldiers reserves. But there are two elements to it. Of course, should be as qualitative as possible. So in this case, we realize that also to create the whole infrastructure of integrating the soldiers, also creating the all necessary base for already sustaining the infrastructure for reserve soldiers, you need also a bit of time and a bit of preparatory work to be done. So that's why we do it gradually. On a female part, we are very proud of our female soldiers. Actually, Latvia, if you look professional service, one of the highest in the NATO countries. Around 20% of our professional soldiers are female soldiers. And I mean, once more, we are proud and happy that exactly about the female presence and contribution to our military strengths. And yes, discussion has been there with regard to conscription as well, as that we should reintroduce for both genders in this case, but we started with male, but I think this discussion is open and will be open. And of course, this also has a regional dimension. We see similar discussions in other regional our partners, be it in Finland, be it in Estonia. So certainly this is not off the table, but we start step by step as well, even though, I guess, realizing importance and urgency of the whole move forward, but at the same time we start with male conscription, but the discussion will be certainly open also for female conscription as well in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Ma'am?
Welcome back to Washington, Minister. Going off of the funding question, there's been reports with former President Donald Trump in terms of his views of funding the war in Ukraine. How worried is Latvia about the US elections in November, and are you taking steps to prepare in the event that the executive branch decides to make different moves with funding?
Once more, I mean, the funding unified approach is extremely important, so we believe that unified approach must be there, that the US is absolutely have been a leading country as well to mobilizing this, unified, and also the supplies support for Ukraine. So that's why, of course, we expect that it will be continued. And of course, we wish that it's also, and we very much hope that it will be continuing in a very unwavering and steady way. Yes, of course, we also realize that it is a domestic dynamics and also election context. So, but once more, I would express my hope that, this unwavering support will be continued regardless of administration, regardless of change and transition of administrations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sir.
Oh, good afternoon. Labdien Kataviet. Hope I pronounced that correctly. I'm Chris Orr, formerly senior defense editor for 1945, now publisher of the Patreon page, The Arsenal of Democracy. You can see what I did there. And last but not least, a proud Hudson Institute donor. Minister Spruds, I think if your time, I have a two-part question for you regarding the capabilities of the Latvian armed forces. First of all, what current capabilities does your Air Force bring to the table? I ask that from the perspective, speaking myself as a former U.S. Air Force officer. And second of all, what is the capabilities of your Special Operations Forces? Thank you. Paldies.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, it's not a public information. No, of course. I mean, actually, we are proud of our special forces. I'm not going too much into the detail, but yes, I think they are very skillful, and we're very proud of the efficiency of Special Operation Forces. As for the air force capabilities, yes, we don't have any fighter jets, but at the same time, we develop our Air Force, and there are a couple of parts. Of course, we have the Black Hawks, what we have together acquisition with the United States, and of course we cooperate here also very efficiently with Michigan National Guards. Just visited Michigan National Guards as well, and we very appreciate and grateful for this partnership with Michigan National Guards. So the Black Hawk, the cooperation goes on. Of course, we also realize now that it's important for us to advance and develop our drone capability. So that's why actually Latvia, as I said, initiated, and together with UK, we are leading the drone coalition. Of course, idea is to support as much as possible Ukrainians, and we specifically, of course, supply or will be supplying also with drones what Ukrainians need. But at the same time, we also realize that it is very important to develop our own capabilities in terms of different kind of course, drone capabilities. And it's not just about drone capabilities, it's also counter-drone capabilities. Of course, it's also electronic warfare. So we should look at more comprehensively as well. Last but not least, I mean, if we can integrate, yes, we absolutely take seriously air defenses. Of course, we have our short-range air defenses, but now the acquisition of medium-range air defenses have just been accomplished. We have the IRIS-T acquisition, so of course it will take some time, but certainly the air defenses so are being perceived as instrumental for securing our military assets, civilian infrastructure, but of course also the human lives. So that's why, yes, if you look more widely, absolutely sort of air defense or air force as such, or protecting our skies, is perceived to be an important task, where we also have to contribute to the NATO security at large.
Mm-hmm. Do we have time for one more? How are you doing in time? Because I know you have to. You have
for one more, certainly.
One more question.
Absolutely, with pleasure.
You, sir?
Thank you very much, Minister, for being here. My question is about the accession of Sweden and Finland. In this country, I think there's perhaps a little bit of a danger of complacency. They look at the wonderful blue map across the eastern flank, and they say, well, we solved that problem, all is good. This is an election year, so there'll be some triumphalism feelings about how things are going in Europe. I'd just like to ask you from a different perspective, given the lengthy history of Finland and Sweden being neutral, and now suddenly both of them shifting to NATO, what does that tell you about the level of apprehension and perhaps even danger that exists in the minds of Europeans in Europe right now? I think the American public needs to have a kind of a wake-up call. So do you agree with that? Are we underestimating the level of peril that exists in Europe right now?
I think absolutely there is no time for complacency. There is certainly time for urgency. That, yes, I mean, we are dealing with aggressor country just in our neighborhood, which exactly sort of has started the aggression against neighboring countries. So that's why, of course, the countries in the front line close to proximity of that aggressor country realizes that. And of course, that's why exactly Finland and Sweden have joined. Finland and Sweden bring to the table, of course, I think quite efficient capabilities. And Finland has really, in terms of the strategic reserves, the soldier training, I think, has really very efficient, and so it's very sizable. If you look also, Sweden also has quite a number of very sort of advanced capabilities, including the Air Force. And here we see that additional strengthening the regional capabilities and cooperation, integration is very important. Even already integration and cooperation among the countries, including with Sweden and Finland, it has already some history. So it just didn't start right now or starts right now. I mean, of course, in the region, we've been cooperating already for some time with Sweden and Finland. But yes, of course, the Finland and Sweden joining shows that understanding that to be neutral, that's not in a sense, the best choice, that now it's a choice when we are unified, that we are part of the collective defense alliance. I think it once more attests to the strengths and sustainability actually of the alliance that these two countries have chosen. But of course, it takes some time also to change the mindsets, to realize what is this existentialism, the existential threat of Russia in the long term for the neighboring countries, but not only for the whole Euro-Atlantic or transatlantic community. And I think it should be reminded all the time that yes, this is expansionist Russia, what we are facing. Most likely we are facing it for a lengthy period, for a long time. Countries have made very relevant, very responsible choices joining, actually underlining the importance of being part of the unified approach. So, of course, there is no time for complacency and time for somehow taking it lightly. Yes, absolutely.
Shall we leave it at that now? So let you go to your next meeting?
Yes, I mean, we can.
Or if anybody has any more questions, then we can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Honor to have you visit us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.